Welcome back. This is Face the Nation. We move on to Mr. Ashoka Besekar, consultant data research. You said that the 20th Amendment of the Constitution should be brought for the right reasons. Do you think it is time now, at least, to bring electoral reforms and ensure that you elect individuals responsible for people directly? The time starts now.
Well, I think there are some serious misgivings towards the present electoral system. Some of them, as I touched on earlier, regarding costs and violence and things like that. They're popular, catchy things to speak about, but I mean, with costs, if you feel like you're going to stop people flooding, if people are spending a lot of money in a district, what's stopping them from focusing it on an electorate? So the reasons and the need for other things like campaign finance and things are essential. But I believe that if the president's mandate, and I mean that electoral reform was a big thing. I mean, the 19th Amendment was a big deal, but so was the prospect of electoral reform. So it's important that it's addressed, because that's what he was elected to do. But I mean, if it's not on the mixed member proportionate dual vote, he's not delivering on what he has promised. And I've seen what was gazetted, and I must say, with the greatest of respect, it was a real shambles. It was very, very difficult, impossible to follow. I mean, the fact that there is even a list. I mean, if you control F and you search that document, the only reference to a list is the national list. So I mean, is there a district list or not? If so, I mean, the fact that the document has been submitted in the way it has, I believe, has actually helped undermine the process, because I think there are small parties now who I know are actually who say, if this ever goes through and we have these constituencies, we must definitely have the dual vote. But what they're saying is that we don't want to even give the lend credibility to this draft that has been submitted, so we don't even want to talk about the dual vote or anything else. We just want to say we're happy with the system that we have at the moment. So I feel like this is a good opportunity given the president's mandate, but unfortunately I feel the drafted bill has let the 20th Amendment down slightly.
Thank you very much, Mr. Besekar, consultant data research. Professor Rajiv Vijay Singha, you are a parliamentarian. You supported President Maithripala Sirisena during the election campaign. The president promised to bring in reforms, electoral reforms, and he in fact constantly said that Parliament would be dissolved after electoral reforms are introduced. However, it is not the case now. We hear news that Parliament will be dissolved at midnight today. The Gazette notification in this regard will be issued at midnight today. What are your thoughts on this?
I think it's an absolute tragedy. I think, in all fairness, President Maithripala Sirisena, when he was elected, he was very sincere about his promises. And unfortunately, because of the dynamics of the situation, he gave over the implementation of those promises to a couple of people, in particular the present Prime Minister, but also former President Kumaratunga. And as you know, former President Kumaratunga, she told me once her children told her she has a butterfly mind. She doesn't concentrate. She's full of good ideas. So she abdicated. She went off. And it turned into a UNP government and the UNP agenda, which was not the promise in the manifesto. Now, very clearly, none of these other reforms that I mentioned came high on the list of the UNP. And from the moment they worked on the 19th Amendment and got at least half of what they wanted through, not the whole of it, thank heavens, they then just wanted dissolution, and they have been pressurizing the president since then to dissolve. And if indeed he has given in to these pressures, I think it's a very, very sad thing, because he made certain promises, and I think the whole country believes that he's someone who kept his promises. Now, he may well say, well, it was impossible to reach consensus, but I think he knew that we were coming close to it, and it was only the UNP that stood in his way. I was told today that one factor that perhaps may have been used to push him, because I think he wanted to keep his promise, was if he didn't have an election and have a new government in place by September, all hell would break loose in Geneva. And I think that was a sort of threat Now I don't know whether that's true, but that seems to be the only thing that could have moved him, because I believe he was sincere. He understood the need for electoral reform passionately, and I'm afraid I must quickly disagree with Ashoka, because while I can see that you can try to control elections in other ways, the intra-party conflict which is generated by the preferential system was terrible. At the very least, we should have just got rid of the 3 preferences. Because if you had only 1 preference, then people could have at least worked within their constituencies. But you cannot say that we can stop people spending money, because when you have to spend in a large area, fighting everyone in your own party for 3 votes, I think you will inevitably get problems, and I don't think it's a law and order question, it is a question of principle. And I think that is a vital factor that should have been addressed, and I'm deeply sorry if that opportunity has passed.
Pranay, just very quickly, do you think, in your opinion, the President dissolved Parliament out of fear, because of pressure, or on his own accord?
I think there are several reasons. One of them is pressure that was applied on him, because he seemed determined not to at his commitment. I think the UNP in particular. There is a school of thought that he was perhaps a bit worried of the developments within the SLFP, but in actual practice, I think the longer he stayed, the longer his own position was getting strengthened. Certainly in the last 2 weeks, there was a perception that Maithripala Sirisena was emerging into his own, and now if he has dissolved under this obvious barrage of pressure, I think the perception will be, well, he couldn't stand up to that pressure, because he had said very clearly he wasn't going to dissolve. Of course, I think things were complicated by the fact that the panic that had set in over the possible Cope report, because I think that would have a damning effect, because after all, I feel ashamed that I campaigned for good governance, for honesty, for removing corruption, for transparency, and to find this, kicked in the teeth was really very upsetting. But then there was also the fact that the UNP had run out of steam. My article today in the Island in the Good Governance series talks about not only a failure of good governance, but a failure of governance, because many ministers are running around saying we can't do anything. And this brings me to one point. I think one of the tragedies of the 19th Amendment was they did not set up an independent public service. If permanent secretaries are permanent and go through whether there's a change of government or not, they then will continue with the agenda in terms of the interests of the people. But by keeping the appointment in the hands of politicians, you have made the message clear that you're a political appointment, and therefore what's happened recently, the whole work has ceased, because everyone's just waiting for the election. It's a tragedy.
Mr. Abhay Gunawardena, and it happened again. Hard work down the drain?
Now we have achieved something, so we need to start from where we have stopped. So the process will emerge again. So at that stage, I think what we have achieved so far, we have interacted with a lot of parties, we have the new concepts. Now we are trying to merge these things and come to an agreement. So next steps would be to, it's true that we were in a hurry to do something because of the other limitations. So we have time now, so we can have in-depth discussions, and practically speaking, certain things we need to rectify. Now we did simulations for the past data, but it will, now you were mentioning about the overhangs. Now with the dual ballot paper, the overhangs might increase. So that tendency and the provision should be there. So what we have done, we analyzed what's happening in the other countries, but we need to understand the ground situation. So most importantly, the ground situation. We inherited the existing system. We need to make sure that those aspirations of the people who originally had should accommodate without disturbing the numbers they originally had. So all those things, now we have gone towards a consensus building process. So still something left, so we can discuss, and I cannot see something drastically different can happen at the next stage. So this was evolving well. It was evolving that we could accommodate most of things, and there were initially a lot of issues relating to certain issues like are we going to increase the majority of the major party? No, those things we dropped. So because of that reason, we are building our consensus. So I think we have to start from what we have done. So it's just a little bit left.
Thank you very much, Mr. Abhay Gunawardena, for your thoughts. I open the floor for questions from the journalists. Faraz?
Professor Vijay Singh, I think this might do for you. How far will these proposed reforms go towards ensuring that in Sri Lanka the weak will be secure? The weak in this case meaning the minorities.
I think it will only happen if we avoid majoritarianism, and the real tragedy of the first past the post system in both 70 and 77 and earlier was overwhelming majoritarianism. I think that has been got over by the simple fact that, as the President pledged and as has been made clear in all these drafts that we've had, the final Parliament should reflect the will of the people. But I also think that the point Asoka made is very clear, that would be distorted because of what he described as the tendency to vote for the winning party. So you need two ballots, absolutely. I think once that is done, you can actually get rid of what is a big complication in the present 20th Amendment, which is a district-based division. I think the district-based division made sense if you were not going for two ballots. But even with regard to, Asoka made the point about the concentrated minorities, the minute you have two ballots, they will get their fair proportion, for the simple reason that it doesn't matter whether the constituency is small or large, everybody can vote for the party they want. So I think a lot of difficulty will be got over, and we can move to nation-based mixed system. And I think the ideal is actually half and half, but you can do it with 60-40 as New Zealand has showed or whatever. And once you've done that, I think everybody would get their place in the sun, or at least accurate representation in terms of their proportion. But I also think an equally important part of safeguarding the minorities, and I'm not even only talking of racial minorities or political minorities, is the Bill of Rights. As you probably know, in the last 3 months, I have introduced 3 constitutional amendments. They will not see the light of day because they go to the Prime Minister, who can then forget them for 6 months. But I put them on record because to show how easy it is. Last week, Vasanta Sennayak and I proposed a Bill of Rights, which was pledged in the Mahinda Chintana in 2005. I got, when I was Secretary of the Ministry, a draft, but just before the election nothing happened. That is now there, and that safeguards individual rights. Similar with other matters. Because one point I want to make is that when Vasanta and I realized a year and a half ago that nothing was moving, we put very clear proposals and emphasized what we think is necessary for change, including electoral reform and, very importantly, restriction of the cabinet. I think those are the 2 most corrupting factors in this country, and I'm really sorry that we haven't moved fast enough on them, although on 19 there is at least the sense of trying to reduce it to 30. The exception that has been allowed is unacceptable. I moved an amendment, it didn't get through, but those are areas we must focus on.
Yeah, well, let's move on to Faraz.
Are we likely, seeing that these reforms have not been achieved, are we likely to see yet another virtually hung parliament, where the minority is obviously going to vote with the safety that they have for their own people?
Well, you have to remember that the present electoral system actually, I don't think, really helps the minorities that much. It's a game of bluff, you see. You know, the TNA will certainly get its seats.
Yeah, the North seems to vote only with them.
No, and not Tamil minorities who will get under, whether it's first past the post or the present system, they get their number. In fact, it's overhang that worries. It is actually the people who will get more seats, perhaps, or think they'll get more seats under this system than they would under the proposed amendment, but it wouldn't have been the case with the 2 votes, would be the JVP, the JHU, the Muslim Congress, and 1 or 2 of the other Muslim parties. So I don't really know what will happen, because I think in the long run, most of them will end up going with the major parties. So I think and then we are back again to the whole question of, are they subject to party discipline or not? You know, so the Rauf Hakim game which the Muslim Congress has been playing for the last 20 years.
Ashoka, you voiced some strong concerns about the 20th Amendment, but electoral reforms are upon us. So let's look at it constructively. In your opinion, doesn't the 20th Amendment conform to international best practices? But how do we then, let's put it into perspective and try to salvage this?
Yeah. So I mean, as you all have been discussing the fact that Parliament has been dissolved, I mean, and I can appreciate that there's been a lot of hard work that's been put in by various people, even though I may disagree with many of the things there. But I mean, I think that what was interesting was that the 19th Amendment, the presidential election and the build-up to the presidential election, which people like Professor Vijay Singh and others had also contributed towards building the momentum, people knew what the 19th Amendment was about. People understood the ideas behind it, the excesses, and it was essential that the 19th Amendment passed. And if you stood against the 19th Amendment, it was just unthinkable. Now, the thing is, with the 20th Amendment, in my opinion, no one has tried to explain what this means for a voter.
You mean, are you trying to say that there is no public discourse?
No public discourse at all. Basically, the entire public discourse has been around the numbers and how this works in parties' interests.
How should this ideally happen?
I mean, this should really happen with some discussion in the Sinhala press concerning the fact of how the sovereignty of voters is enhanced by the electoral reform. I mean, it's democratizing the process of democracy. I mean, it should only be, electoral reform should only serve as to sort of grant greater and more consolidated democratic rights to voters and the public. But no one really understands how this happens, because that's not where the debate has been. The debate has been technocratic. No one has really sort of tried to, I mean, I appreciate that mainstreaming in electoral reform is very challenging, but that's not to say that it can't be done. And one other point that I really want to make is that some people will turn around and say, you know, this idea around this dual vote, it's too complicated, our vote. I mean, this idea that things are too complicated for our voters, I think is complete nonsense. I mean, at the moment, they choose a party and they choose 3 preferences. Here we just give it, there they tick 4 places, here they tick 2 places. And the other thing is, there's absolutely no reason to say that our voters can't do what the voters in Germany or New Zealand and places can do. I mean, there are people who are saying this. There are people who are saying our people can't understand it. But those same people were the people saying that before the presidential election, our people will never look beyond the state press and everything else. And ultimately they did, and they voted for that change.
So Mr. Boysekara, what's standing in the way of all of this?
So, I mean, what's standing in the way of this is the fact that the media, the way the media engages, is that the media carries the stories that the politicians are feeding them, and the politicians are feeding them things like 145 plus 55 plus 37. You're not going to get anyone. You're not going to create any public debate when you're just throwing 3 numbers around in different variations. You know, and that's how this debate has gone, and that's why there's really no real traction. President Maithripala Sirisena's mandate continues after this general election. So it's then upon him to still maintain his commitment to electoral reform, but get a national debate started instead of this technocratic approach.
Mr. Abhigunawardana, your opinion on democratizing the democracy process and of a national debate?
Well, actually, I'm not sure whether he was following the media in Sinhala mainly. There are a lot of discussions about these issues. For the last 1.5 months, this discussion was there. This discussion started early May. So, well, people responded. They understood. These are not just numbers. There are reasons behind discussing numbers. So, now, without knowing the reasons why we are discussing the numbers, I don't think we can arrive at a conclusion. So, these numbers are very important because they reflect certain concerns of different groups. So from beyond that, actually, I agree with most of the things the principals mentioned here. So those things we need to accommodate. There's no question about that. That was the evolving process. We cannot have the full system in place at the beginning, because it was a negotiation process. Like now, let's say now, for numbers, increasing the numbers, originally none of the parties agreed to increase the numbers, but later on only one party was not in agreement with increasing numbers, that's UNP. All the other parties agreed. So then they started the discussion of having the number of polling divisions. So that discussion led and that deviated the minor parties away from UNP, because they realized that at the end of the day their concerns were used for something else. So that was gradually happening. 2 ballot papers, it was evolving process. I firmly believe that by next week we could have achieved that 2 major parties will agree to the 2 ballot. So that makes the full picture. So from the outset we cannot have the final system in place, but this was an evolving process that happened mainly because we had an in-depth discussion in the country.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. We will now move on to the final round. Before that, we're going for a short commercial break. This is Face the Nation. Welcome back. This is Face the Nation, the final round. 20th Amendment to the Constitution and the future of the country is the topic at hand. We move on to Mr. Ashok Abe Gunawardhan, Chairman, CEO, Strategic Enterprise Management Agency, and also member of the Drafting Committee of the 20th Amendment to the Constitution. Mr. Abe Gunawardhan, what changes do you envisage in terms of electoral reforms in the country? Because you said electoral reforms this time around was brought in haphazardly. Now there's a window of opportunity to rethink about the reforms that have been presented and table it to Parliament. What changes do you envisage?
Well, actually the basic structure, I don't think we need to change that significantly, because we started from national proportion, then we divided that into district proportion and national proportion, and then tried to make sure that still if there's an overhanging at district level, that can be absorbed by the national proportion without disturbing the proportionate basis. So to that extent, I think we cannot have a better solution than that, because there are district level concentrations. So by having only a national level proportion, that certain concerns may arise because of the reason that may dilute the national concentration. So in that context, beyond that, well, what are the implications of using this method? That we need to further investigate. Now, I think now this was tagged with the 19th Amendment. There was a reason. I think it would have been better if we have the election system first and then discuss about the devolving the executive power. Now, because it was tagged, now as we have already understood, the existing proportionate basis will not make sure that the leading party will get a simple majority in the Parliament. To tackle that, we had this executive precedence. So the 19th Amendment, that did not go to the far we were expecting. So because of that reason, we could maintain the existing proportionate basis as it is, and we were trying to concentrate on the other aspects, like the core issues was getting rid of Manape or the preferential voting, and to make sure that there's at least one MP for each polling unit. So those were the 2 core issues. Why we came up with this new system, the third element, to make sure that we are not disturbing the existing proportionate based system, which was comfortable with all minor parties, minority parties, and the major parties as the executive presidency continues. So there were different affiliations of different parties, like the Sinhala based groups were concentrating to try to use this opportunity to have a stable government in the Parliament. That is not happening in this context. So still, if we are not discussing about changing the executive presidency system further, I don't think we need to change the basic structure of the this election process as well. But we need to make sure that two ballot papers are included, and also we need to go with the existing 160 polling divisions which went through a very tough process in 1974 until 1976, and because of that reason we need to start from where it was stopped. We cannot just ignore the 160 and 168 the FPP allocation we had, and we cannot go back to, we cannot go reduce the numbers. So still this will add on to the existing process. So I probably believe that we need to have a compromise between the number of polling divisions, two ballot papers, and the total number of seats in the parliament, which can address all concerns.
Thank you very much, Mr. Asoka Abbegunawardhan, Chairman, CEO, Strategic Enterprise Management Agency. Mr. Asoka Abbesekar, Consultant, Veta Research. The need of the hour is to ensure that a clean parliament, individuals who would serve the interest of the public would be appointed to parliament. What do you suggest that we should do?
Well, I think there are a few factors here. But the first thing that I would suggest is that the public takes very close note of what happens in this nomination process. So the nominations, I've just on the back of paper calculation, if Parliament dissolving is gazetted tomorrow, the proclamation is gazetted, it will be between the 17th of August and the 31st of August in which the election will be held. And the nomination, now when it comes to nominations, it's essential that the public look at the mandate of the President right now and look at the sorts of nominations the different parties make. Now there's been this March 12th declaration. This March 12th declaration is espousing that parties nominate particular candidates with particular credentials or backgrounds or whatever else. I don't necessarily, I fully agree with every single element of those, the declaration, but I think it's excellent that PAFL have taken the responsibility of really pushing that forward. And then you have to make an assessment of how these MPs how these nominees, you have to make an assessment of these nominees based on these sorts of commitments given in the March 12th declaration. One thing that I would add though is that it's very important that lots of these things which are now don't get forgotten. So we have the RTI bill, extremely important but not mainstreamed, and now it has to go through an entire process again. The standing orders of Parliament and the reform of the standing orders. One very sad thing is that people keep asking this code of conduct for MPs, isn't it really important because that's about how they behave in Parliament and everything. Actually, it's the standing orders of Parliament which also have to be reformed and enforced, and Professor Vijay Singh has done a lot of work on that. It's important that those sorts of things are given attention, and unfortunately it appears as though after the election, will people lose focus of these pledges of the 100-day government? That is to be seen, but what I would like to see is President Sirisena continuing to focus on the things that he pledged and couldn't deliver now, and then hoping to reconstitute Parliament and really push forward with those things as well. And with regards to the electoral reform debate, a national debate is possible here. Verite Researchers' media analysis on a weekly basis shows that it's really the alternative press which has been championing it from the democratic values perspective. This needs to be mainstreamed, and politicians need to take the responsibility of mainstreaming that.
Thank you very much. That of course was Asoka Abbesekar, Consultant, Verita Research. Professor Rajiva Vijay Singha. A few months from now there would be a new parliament. How would you advise the public to vote this time around?
Well, I think one of the major problems we face is that with the present electoral system, the two key pillars of governance don't exist. I would say they are accountability and responsibility. Let me just introduce a new dimension. I think one of the most important factors of a constituency MP is not only that the people will have someone who is accountable to them and to them alone, but more importantly, there is a responsibility of the party to nominate a good candidate. Now, what we have seen in the last 30 years is the sort of Buggins's turn. You know, they pick a few people who they think are very good, then they give shops to senior members of the party and their family members come in, then they pick a few popular people, and then they just leave it to the people to have a race. And as you know, the average voter with 3 manapas, okay, may have one person he knows, then he thinks, who am I going to go to? I know that name, well-known name, I've seen that face, oh, that person has been in jail, so he must be pretty good because the government has put him in jail. And you have this absolute joke where there is no sense of responsibility. Now, I think one factor is that the selection of MPs is very important. I'm glad Patrol has done this work, but there must also be accountability. When you select a large number for a list, then there is no sense that we have selected this person who is the best person to represent Boralla or Kotmale or Vatukote or whatever. Secondly, I think the fact that Asoka raised and which the other Asoka answered is very relevant. There has been discourse, but it's only been for the last few months. And I think it's absolutely absurd that no one highlighted this fact that we made a pledge to introduce the discussion in January, and nothing was done about it. And it shows the neglect. I think the other factors you mentioned, the code of conduct, the standing orders, all those are part of a package because we wanted Jahapalanya. And good governance means a lot of things have to come together. Those two key words I mentioned. And that was one of the reasons for the code of conduct. In fact, at the last meeting of the Standing Orders Committee, which I pushed and after February, I finally managed to get a meeting earlier this week. In fact, we pointed out that the ethical code should be part of the standing orders. Unfortunately, the speaker wasn't very interested. I'd got the copy of the New Zealand standing orders, and he was very enthusiastic about that, and it's all there. Declarations of assets. I tried to suggest that in accordance with that, not only should be a declaration of assets, I know Asoka has been going through my declaration of assets, which I have no problem about, but then he couldn't do anything about it. He couldn't publish and say, these people haven't given their assets. So not only should there be a declaration of assets, the Registrar of Parliament should give a synopsis of this so that the public know accountability. That is the key.
Thank you very much, Professor Rajiv Vijayasinghe. But before I leave the three gentlemen today, Professor Vijayasinghe, are we going to see more of parliamentarian Professor Rajiv Vijayasinghe?
I have not the slightest idea.
You would step down as a parliamentarian?
No, I have no intention of stepping down. The Liberal Party wrote in January to the UPFA because at that stage I hadn't quite realized how appalling the UNP was under its present leadership. But we still took a decision that the social aspects of liberalism were better represented by a moderate UPFA. And we wrote, and in fact the General Secretary of the UPFA sent us an agreement which we signed, which we hadn't had before. I was there informally. So I hope that they will find a way to accommodate the Liberal Party there.
And you would support the ideologies of President Maithripala Sirisena?
Absolutely. But I would also hope that those ideologies stand firm. And as I said, I'm a bit worried that his clear pledge to fulfill his promises has been overcome. I hope that will prove temporary.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. Mr. Asoka Abegunawardena, Chairman, CEO, Strategic Management, Enterprise Management Agency, Mr. Asoka Obesekera, Consultant With Research, and thank you very much, Professor Rajiv Vijayasinghe, Parliamentarian, Leader of the Liberal Party. Mr. Asoka Obesekera said that reforms should be brought forward, electoral reforms should be brought forward for the right reasons. Professor Rajiv Vijayasinghe said the minority parties are engaged in a game of bluff. Mr. Asoka Abegunawardena said that it's unfortunate, but we should now pick up the pieces from where we left and move forward in terms of electoral reforms. Now, what is the order of the day? Parliament will be dissolved tonight. Once again, the ball is in your court. Ensure that you appoint individuals who are responsible, who are clean, and who would serve the public interest. Thank you very much for joining us right here on Face the Nation. All the best and good night.